Anthony van Dyck, the name that, in a single glance, changed what a painted portrait could be. Born in Antwerp at the dawn of the 17th century, Van Dyck combined the dramatic energy of the Baroque with a new ease, elegance, and psychological subtlety. He could make kings look imperial and humane at once, children appear like miniature adults full of character, and mythic scenes breathe with theatrical passion. From intimate self-portraits to monumental coronation images and the graceful society portraits that defined his reputation, Van Dyck's brush taught aristocracy how to present itself and the world how to see them. His work set the standard for portraiture across Europe for generations. Listen closely and you'll hear how his travels, patrons, and restless imagination shaped a style that still speaks to us: confident, refined, and quietly revolutionary. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating more educational videos like this one. Anthony van Dyck's story begins in Antwerp, where he was apprenticed to Hendrik van Balen and came under the spell of Peter Paul Rubens. Even as a teenager, he showed the compositional daring and color sense that would mark his career. Early works and self-portraits reveal an artist learning to balance bravura with refinement, to render sumptuous fabrics and faces with the same confident stroke. Take his self-portraits. The direct gaze, the careful handling of light across cheek and collar, the subtle psychological play. Those early studies, which you can see in several museum collections, prepared him for greater things: history paintings, mythological subjects, and above all, the portraits that would define his reputation. His hand was already sure. His sensitivity to posture and gesture was already forming. This combination of technical mastery and social insight is the engine of Van Dyck's art. In his 20s, Van Dyck traveled to Italy, where the light and classical traditions deepened his palette and his sense of composition. He absorbed Venetian color and Roman monumentality, but never lost the Flemish gift for detail. In Genoa, he painted for a rich mercantile elite, full-length aristocratic portraits, family groupings, and allegorical commissions. These Genoese works taught him to drape fabrics elegantly, to pose sitters with casual authority, and to set faces against brooding, atmospheric backgrounds. Examples from this period show Van Dyck experimenting with scale: small, jewel-like portraits for collectors and grand theatrical pictures for palaces. He painted children with surprising tenderness and women with an aristocratic poise that feels natural rather than staged. The result was a new model for court portraiture, lit with sophistication, psychologically acute, and universally flattering. Van Dyck's Genoese commissions are a study in how portraiture can convey family identity and social standing. Look at the Balbi children and the Spinola family portraits. Children posed with pets or birds, tiny hands, and precise costumes, each face distinct and expressive. He often composed groups so that relationships emerged through glances and gestures rather than through symbols. Mothers are shown with the soft, watchful authority of guardians. Fathers with a composed dignity. Children as small adults, but with touches of vulnerability. These portraits were meant to signal lineage and taste, and Van Dyck perfected the art of making private intimacy look public and proud. It's easy to forget these are also technical triumphs. Complex arrangements painted with economy and a tactile realism in skin, fabric, and texture. When Van Dyck moved to England in the 1630s, he entered a new theater, the royal court of Charles I. He became principal court painter and redefined how the English monarchy would be seen across Europe. The king's three-quarter portraits, often with the distinctive sash and the Order of the Garter, project both authority and elegance. Van Dyck's sitter posed casually, yet regal, a hand on a hip, a turned shoulder, a calm, steady stare. He painted couples, children, nobles, and ministers, and each portrait became part of the monarchy's visual diplomacy. These images traveled as gifts, helped cement alliances, and created a royal image that endured even through tumultuous political times. His compositions from this era show an ease with full-length settings, drapery, and the artful placement of props, gloves, hats, swords, that become extensions of personality. Among Van Dyck's most famous achievements are the royal equestrian and ceremonial portraits of Charles I. The equestrian portrait transforms the king into both warrior and sovereign, a blend of motion and stillness. Horse rearing, cloak billowing, yet the rider calm and composed. The large equestrian works were political theater on canvas, public displays of power meant to be seen in staterooms and galleries. Equally important are the intimate coronation-style busts and three-quarter portraits that emphasize the king's poise and refinement. One curious fact, Van Dyck painted multiple versions and copies, and his workshop produced variants for different patrons. The triple portrait, for instance, was designed as a study to send to sculptors who would make a royal bust. Van Dyck's images served both art and function across media. While portraits paid the bills, Van Dyck also pursued history and religious painting, a legacy from his Rubens training. Mythological scenes like Rinaldo and Armida show dramatic narratives with sensuous figures and theatrical staging. Biblical works such as Samson and Delilah are charged with human drama, the moment of betrayal rendered with psychological intensity and painterly boldness. In these works, Van Dyck blends Baroque motion with a refined sense of color and composition. Figures interlock, diagonals lead the eye, and light focuses attention on the emotional core. Comparison with his portraits reveals the same instincts: an eye for gesture, a talent for suggesting story through posture, and a brush that can be both fluent and economical. Van Dyck painted with an economy of means that disguises careful planning. His studio practice combined masterly underdrawing with spirited final brushwork, softened backgrounds, shimmering fabrics, and faces modeled with subtle tonal variations. Self-portraits reveal how he studied expression and aging, while the famed self-portrait with a sunflower hints at symbolism, the sunflower sometimes read as a sign of devotion or loyalty. He led a busy workshop. Pupils and assistants painted drapery, accessories, even entire lesser portraits, while Van Dyck focused on faces and essential finishing touches. This balance explains the high output and consistent quality, and also why many versions and copies exist. For collectors, a Van Dyck portrait was both an artwork and a crafted statement, delivered by a practiced atelier tuned to aristocratic taste. Van Dyck's influence stretched far beyond his lifetime. In England, his portrait style became the model for generations. Lely, Gainsborough, and Reynolds all drew on the poise and brushwork Van Dyck established. His images of royalty and nobility set visual standards for courtly representation across Europe. The fact that so many contemporaries made copies, engravings, and variant versions, and that his works were widely circulated, helped embed his aesthetic. He is remembered not just for technical brilliance, but for inventing a vocabulary of grace: the turned shoulder, the casual hand, the luminous but restrained palette. Even today, a state portrait or formal photograph often nods unconsciously to a posture Van Dyck popularized. Anthony van Dyck gave portraiture a new language, a grammar of poise, a tone of elegance, a cadence of brushwork that made power appear gracious and individuality appear refined. From Antwerp workshops to Italian palaces, and finally to the English court, he shaped public image and private likeness with equal mastery. When you look at his portraits, you're seeing a nexus of politics, fashion, and personal psychology, all rendered with unmatched subtlety. If you leave with one thought, let it be this: Van Dyck didn't merely copy a face, he composed an identity. His portraits remain blueprints for how image and authority interact. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this portrait of an artist who painted portraits of the powerful, remember to explore the images linked in the video notes and keep looking closely at the faces that history chose to remember.